in the West, perhaps with our very stressed out lives, people more and more appreciate the possibility of bringing some ease, some relaxation, and some clarity into our daily lives through the practice of learning how to deal with the mind more skillfully through meditation. So, you know, I mean, one thing is that, as somebody mentioned the other day, in traditional texts, both Hindu and Buddhist, the mind is often compared to a wild horse. The Buddha also compared it to a drunken elephant, sometimes a drunken elephant in rut, as well as to a monkey. Of course, the monkey mind, thinking not of monkeys in zoos, nice and placid and depressed, but monkeys in the wild who are always jumping all over the place and primarily concerned with food, fighting, and copulation. So this pretty much sums up many people's minds. So the question is, how do we tame this animal? A horse, a wild horse, has great potential, but first it needs to be tamed. We cannot train the horse until first it becomes tamed. Once it is tamed and trusting and amenable, then it can be trained the way we want it and become a very, very useful companion for us. But in the meantime, while it's just wild, then we want it to go this way, it will always go that way. We want it to stay quiet, it will run around. We want it to run around, it will stay quiet. And this is the average mind, as anybody who knows, who has ever tried to sit down and practice has found. Normally, because we just follow the flow of our minds, wherever the mind goes, we go with it, we think that we're in control. It's only when we actually sit and try to quieten the mind and keep it focused on one point that we recognize that we are not in control of our own minds. And this is serious because we are never separate from our ordinary conceptual mind. I mean, on a relative level, we live in our minds. And yet those minds are full of feelings, of thoughts, of memories, of conceptions, many of which are not helpful, many of which bring us down, many of which create a lot of problems for ourselves and for all those around us. And we are the slaves of our mind. We are not the masters of our own mind, yet we never can be separated from our mind. We carry it with us everywhere. All day long we're thinking, planning, feeling, experiencing, perceiving. Endlessly, endlessly, endlessly. At night we're dreaming. We have to be with our mind 24 hours a day. And yet very often the mind is not our friend. The mind is not our friend. So we have to learn how, first step, to make a friend and an ally of our mind. So basically, in Buddhist traditional way of practicing, meditation is divided into two basic levels. Of course, in Buddhism has been going for 2,600 years, so there are many, many different methods throughout the Buddhist world in different countries. I mean, everybody's heard of Zen and Vipassana and Tantra, and there are many, many other methods besides. I mean, basically, of course, it's like a Dharma supermarket. You know, you go in and there are so many things on display, even in Tibetan Buddhism alone. You know, there are so many methods, so many ways, so many techniques and different aspects. But here tonight we're just going to deal with the very basic practices which were set up by the Buddha himself, more or less. And so it's in two levels. What the first level is called in Sanskrit shamatha, and this means to calm, to make peaceful. And the second aspect is called vipassana, which means like seeing clearly or insight, as it's nowadays translated. So shamatha is the basic way of taming the mind, of getting the mind settled down, quiet, and focused. Attention. So that if we want to think of this, the mind settles on that. If we want to think of that, the mind settles on that. We all know this. I mean, it's not something very esoteric. You know, if we're reading a very interesting book, then we are totally absorbed in that book. If we're watching a particularly interesting movie, we are one with that movie. We don't have to make our minds concentrate, because our minds go towards it. So we all know that. We all have that faculty of being able to be attentive when it's something which really interests and fascinates us. The problem is that often meditation is not very interesting and fascinating, especially if you're just looking at your breath. You know, the first 1 minute or two, there might be some interest, but after that, one breath is pretty much like the next breath, and then what? So this is where practice comes in. You know, really the essence of this type of practice is patience and perseverance. Like, you know, if you want to learn to play an instrument, nobody can just sit down and immediately play an instrument. They have to practice the scales again and again and again and again, endlessly, until eventually the music plays through them. But that doesn't happen just like that. You know, it takes really a lot of effort to become effortless. Practice, practice, practice. Usually in Buddhism, in many schools of Buddhism, the object of concentration can be anything. It can be a virtuous object, like visualizing a Buddha image, or a seed syllable like Om or Ah. It can be, when I first started, the chief yogi at our monastery, he gave me a pebble and put it down and said, all right, concentrate on that. And again, you know, the fascination of a pebble is limited. And one of the reasons they choose a pebble is because it is not interesting, so you cannot really have too much thoughts about it. But also it trains the eyes, because in Buddhist meditation you keep your eyes slightly open or wide open depending on the kind of meditation you're doing. So it focuses the gaze, and at the same time the mind stays on that pebble, and when extraneous thoughts come, you settle it back on the object of your meditation. However, the most common, widespread focus of this preliminary aspect of meditation is the breath. And in this type of meditation, we do not alter the breath. It's not a pranayama. We just breathe. We breathe and then note the breath. There are, again, various variations on this. Some are very strict about feeling the breath as it comes in and out of the nostrils. There's a slight current of air that you can feel on the upper lip. And so some focus there, some focus on the rise and fall of the abdomen. In some traditions, there's a lot of concentration on the breath. In the Tibetan tradition, they just use the breath as a kind of holding for the mind. But the main part of the mind is devoted to a sense of very spacious, open relaxation. We're trying to get the mind to quieten down, not by beating it into submission, but by allowing it just to relax into the sense of what is happening in the moment, which is that we're sitting here and we're breathing. Now, traditionally, there is also a way of sitting. In this form of meditation, then ideally, there's what is called the 7 postures of Virachana. First of all, sitting, if possible, in full lotus posture. If not, cross-legged as comfortably as you can. If you can't sit cross-legged, then you sit in a chair, but make sure that, again, that the feet are supported either on the ground, or if your feet are too small, then on a cushion. The most important thing is to keep the spine straight, but not tense. To put the shoulders up and back and down so that there is a sense of balance in the body. To keep, usually the hands are placed with the left below the right and the thumbs lightly touching, or on the knees. The eyes are slightly opened and about this much distance, where they would naturally fall as you're sitting. And that's why I had the pebble, to keep the eyes focused, to practice focusing the eyes in one point, so they're not just wandering around. And the tongue is slightly just touching the upper palate or the back of the teeth. All of these are ways there, or each one connected with a different nadi or energy channel in the body. And so each of these postures governs a different nadi in order that the nadis should be balanced and the currents, the prana, flowing smoothly. So, and of course, when you're sitting nicely, then you're a triangle. And so this is the most stable way to sit. And once, one is accustomed to it, then it's very comfortable. One of the reasons why you do in Hatha Yoga is in order to get the body flexible and supple, and the inner nadis flexible and supple, so that when we sit, it's easy. And if we sit properly with all the prana flowing smoothly, then it's like we have no body. The body feels so completely balanced that, we're not even conscious of having a body anymore. And this helps us to, focus the mind on what we're trying to do, rather than always being worried that our knees are hurting, our hips are hurting, our back is hurting. So this was originally the reason why people were doing Hatha Yoga. It was to prepare them to really be able to sit for extended lengths of time comfortably. The mind is sometimes compared to a lake which is has winds blowing on it. It's like if you think of the ocean here today, there was a lot of wind, and so there were big waves. And so if you think of a lake with the winds blowing on it, then there are big, big waves. And because there are big, big waves, then we cannot see down very far. The turbulence of the water stirs up a lot of mud, and if we try to look into this lake, all we see is a lot of turbulence, and we can't see much beyond the surface. And so this is like our minds, which are usually very disturbed by outer phenomena which appear to be impinging on our senses and received into our minds and stir up our feelings, our likes, our dislikes, our emotions, our attachments and our irritations. The mind is very disturbed. It's also disturbed by the inner phenomena, our thoughts, our memories, our plans, our worries, our anxieties, our stresses. The mind is very agitated constantly. So when we look at it, we don't see much. All we see is this turbulence. So shamatha meditation, this peaceful calming meditation, is intended to quieten down the waves. We sit, we focus on the breath. Breath comes in, breath goes out, we know it. Normally, when we are breathing, we are not conscious of breathing. We're just breathing. But breath is a very interesting phenomena, as all you would-be yogas and yoginis know very well, because it's very, first of all, it's very intimately connected with the mind. When we are tense, when we are peaceful, when we are angry, when we are lustful, when we are happy, when we are depressed, actually the breath reflects the state of our mind. We breathe differently, depending on the different emotional states which we are experiencing. In addition, the breath is the one basically automatic function which we can have control over the minute we decide to do so. Unlike the heart and the kidneys and liver functions, which just fortunately go on quite happily without our interference, the breath we can immediately control, should we wish to. I mean, if I said to you now, everybody take a deep breath and hold your breath, you would do so. And so the breath is on the cusp between conscious and unconscious, automatic and controlled functioning in the body. In addition, of course, we can only breathe now. We cannot breathe in the past, we cannot breathe in the future. Only we breathe in this moment. And of course that moment is also flowing, but nonetheless, if we know the breath as it is occurring, without commenting on it, just knowing it, then we are here. So it's also a skillful way to bring the mind into the present and to relax the mind. It's very simple. And what is more, we don't have to be in a perfect posture to do it, because always we are breathing. And so, you know, during the day, whenever we remember to do so, we can bring our attention back to the breath. And in that moment, we're here. While you're driving, while you're sitting, while you're working, while you're cutting vegetables, while you're sweeping, at the computer, anytime, just do breathing. We're all breathing. And either we know it or we don't. But it's a very skillful way to bring the mind back into what is happening right now. Especially when it's become very scattered or very stressed. Take a few deep breaths and just be conscious. And with those breaths, relax the mind. It's very important in our practice to have a mind which feels very open, very spacious, very relaxed, and just breathing and knowing. Now, while this is going on, there are also thoughts, endless thoughts. And many people think that the object of meditation is to stop thinking. And therefore the thoughts are regarded as the enemy. We have to suppress the thoughts. We have to get rid of the thoughts. When we are without thoughts, then we are meditating. If we are still thinking, we are not meditating. But in this method of practice, the thoughts are not a problem. It's natural for the mind to think. Thoughts are not the problem. Thoughts are not the problem. The problem is that we identify with the thoughts. That's the problem. And that we get swept away by our thinking. So anyway, we'll go back to that in the next stage. First stage is just to sit, breathe, and know we're breathing. And leave the thoughts in the background of the mind without giving them any attention. It's sort of like if, you know, you're in a house, you're in a room and, you know, visitors keep coming. And then we have a choice. Usually we say, oh, hello, how lovely to see you. Do sit down, have a cup of tea. How are you doing? And then, you know, you're endlessly engaged in all these visitors, and everybody will say how absolutely hospitable you are, and so you'll get more and more visitors all the time, constant. The other method is to slam the door, scream at them that you don't want any visitors and to keep out, and get your shotgun out. And that just creates a very tense, unhappy mind. That's like saying, I'm not going to think. Pebble, pebble, pebble. This usually doesn't work, and also it creates a battle inside the mind. But what we are going to do is just, you know, we're sitting and we're doing whatever we're doing, and the visitors come and we ignore them. And they sort of sit around, ooh, hi. No, look, how are you doing nowadays? You okay? I'm fine, how are you? Just don't give them energy. Let them be there if they want to be there. But you're not going to give them any interest, any rapport with this. And then after a while, these visitors get embarrassed and bored. You're not giving them the attention they deserve. And so gradually they begin to slink out. And the reputation goes around that you're not much fun. And so less and less visitors turn up. Do you understand? The point is that thoughts are not the problem. The problem is that we feed into them. We become fascinated by them. We get carried away by them. And then they will come more and more and more. So the point is not to reject them out of hand or try to suppress thoughts, but just to ignore it, not give them any energy. Because your focus is on whatever is the point of your meditation. And the thoughts in the background can just go on. You're not interested in them. You're interested in whatever is your focal point. And then you get caught up because some particularly succulent thought occurs. And then you catch yourself. And then back to the object. Not with recriminations, not with judgments, not with upset, anger. Just back again and again and again. That is the practice. It's when we give up and just say, oh, well, I can't meditate today, and just go on with the thinking. That's where we've lost. However many times we are distracted, as long as we bring ourselves back again, quietly, peacefully, then that is practice. St. Francis de Sales, he said that giving advice to someone in the Catholic tradition who was practicing prayer and contemplation, he said, even if during that hour you are distracted 100 times, 1,000 times, if you bring yourself back, that hour's worthwhile. So, as I say, it takes patience and it takes perseverance. But relax. Think of the mind as very open, very spacious, not tight. But within that open spaciousness, there is this quality of awareness, of knowing, which is focused on whatever is our object, in this case, the breath. We breathe and we know we are breathing. Sometimes in the breath meditation, people find it helpful at the beginning to count. So then you breathe in and you breathe out 1. You breathe in, you breathe out 2, and go up maybe to 10 and then come back again and start again. If we lose count because we've caught up in our thinking, then we bring it back again to 1. And start again. And again, even if we only get as far as 4 and we've lost it, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just keep going back again and again. It's like practicing scales. You know, your fingers slip. Oh well, never mind. Start again and again. And slowly, slowly, we become accustomed. The mind begins to settle down. It begins to feel comfortable. Normally when we practice, we have a sense of there's the subject, the mind, ourselves, and the object, which is the object of whatever our practice is, object of meditation. And they're like two kind of mountains facing each other. And the mind is trying to get closer to the object of meditation. And so this all takes place in the mind, in our brain, the trying to meditate, trying to get closer to our object of meditation. As the mind really calms down, then the subject, the ego really at this point, which is trying to meditate, subsides. And our awareness, our mindfulness merges with the object of meditation. And at that point, it's as if it goes down from the brain, it subsides into the heart. It's a very different sense of being one with the practice. And at that time, then, you are in a state of very expansive, open awareness, one with the practice, not striving anymore. Because when the meditation is in the heart, then there is no separation. When it's in the head, then it's also involved with the ego, and the ego by its very nature is dualistic. Anyway, so we are practicing and practicing, and slowly the mind begins quite happily, that quality of being attentive, of being aware and conscious and mindful in Buddhist parlance, becomes stronger. The mind becomes more peaceful. This is like the lake. Slowly the waves begin to subside. Now when the waves begin to subside, two things happen. One thing is that then the mirror-like quality of the lake reflects more accurately outer landscape. Sometimes you see pictures of mountains. This is why my book was called Reflections on a Mountain Lake, because a friend of mine took this photo of this lake in Tibet with the mountain, and you couldn't tell in the photo which way up it should go. Was it the reflection and the lake, or the lake and the reflection? Because it was so clear, like a mirror. So our mind, as it calms down and becomes more focused, therefore outer phenomena appear more clearly, not so distorted by our predilections, our biases, our judgments, our thoughts and thinking. We begin to see things more clearly how they really are. And at the same time, the mud begins to subside and come down, and so therefore as we look into the lake, we can see down and down and down. So likewise, as the mind becomes more calm, we have access to deeper and deeper layers of the psyche, which normally, because our minds, the surface of our minds, our ordinary conceptual thinking is churning away, we only see a very, very superficial level of what is actually there inside us. So anyway, we have been looking at the breath, or whatever. The mind has quietened down a bit. We're still thinking, but the thoughts are not so intrusive anymore. They're in the background. And the mind is focused and spacious. Then, and the Tibetans usually say that if you can do 21 rounds of breathing in and out, completely focused, then you're ready for the next stage. And the next stage is that then we turn that searchlight, which has been on the breath or on some object or some visualized object, we turn that, as it were, inwards. And now we, instead of ignoring the thoughts, we look at the thoughts. The traditional description is of someone sitting on the banks of the river, watching the river run by. Normally, we are plunged into the river and swept along by the river. In other words, normally it's as it were submerged in our thinking and our emotions and swept along by our thinking. But now we're stepping out and we're just watching. Not commenting, not judging, not encouraging or discouraging, just observing. Now, of course, the mind can do this. The mind can do this. The mind can observe the mind. And when we really begin to observe the mind, it's like it creates a space. The thoughts are running, and there is the awareness of the thoughts, but we are not the thoughts. The thoughts are just thoughts, rising and falling, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. This flow, this endless flow. It's like watching a movie. Normally, we are not just watching the movie, we are starring in the movie. And often it's either a comedy or a tragedy. But we're completely immersed in that movie. Now we are standing back and just watching it as a movie. Now, the minute we recognize that it's just a movie, then it makes a huge, big difference. Just that in our lives. We don't have to believe what we think. Normally, what we think, our memories, our hopes, our fears, our plans, our beliefs, our prejudices and biases and judgments, they're so real. And they're who I am. This is what makes me, me. And of course, our total identification with our thinking is the root of our unknowing, of our ignorance. We are identifying with all the wrong things. This is our tragedy. So it's very important to be able to recognize that we are not the thoughts. Thoughts are there. It's okay. But they're just thoughts. So this is still part of shamatha. We learn to observe the mind. And in many Buddhist texts, it says the essence of the practice is to observe the mind at all times. Normally, we only observe the mind for very short periods. To be able to constantly be conscious and aware of what's going on in the mind at the time when it's going on without interfering is an extension of this practice. To be aware. But of course, this is still dualistic. This is still the observer and the observed are still, it's not ultimate reality. But it is a very important step towards that. So then we learn how to watch the mind. So then we're sitting and we are looking at the mind. Not interfering, not judging, just watching, observing how the mind flows, all these thoughts. I mean, one of the problems with watching the mind is how utterly our poor minds. I mean, they really think such stupid thoughts so much of the time. And repetitous. My God, it's like watching the same soap opera over and over and over. Oh dear me. You know, I mean, really, considering we're considered to be so intelligent. So therefore, it's very important to get this space where we can witness, where we can observe the mind just as a stream of energy moments. Like the mind, the thoughts are like, you know, like a bubble. They're very bright, they're very shiny, they're very alluring, but click, there's nothing there. They're empty. Once we begin to see that, then we stop identifying so closely. So then we move into the vipassana, into the insight. At this moment we are just quietly watching. One Lama said to me, you know, if you have good shamatha meditation, then the whole of the Dharma is in the palm of your hands, because now the mind is tamed. Back to the lake. We have now, the lake is clear, we can see down to the bottom, but the mud is still down there at the bottom. The stones and the weeds and the rubbish that people have thrown in, it's still down there. Sometimes when people go into very strong shamatha practice, along with the calming of the mind often arises great bliss, a sense of freedom, of tremendous clarity, and you can go into increasingly subtle levels of mind, called in Buddhist parlance the jhanas. Very, very subtle, when finally there is no thought at all, everything is very open and spacious and clear. And traditionally, many people in the time of the Buddha thought that this was liberation. And the Buddha said, no, it's not liberation. Why is it not liberation? Because we have to come down. And the rubbish is still at the bottom of the lake. The mud is still there. So then, with the mind quiet and calm, but very, very clear, very, very clear. One, I should mention that two of the main distractions and problems in practice, one is that we get very agitated and distracted, and so, you know, this has to be dealt with this patience and perseverance and trying to keep the mind focused. And the other is much more insidious, is what in Tibetan is called sinking, which means that we get very, very often it's like a kind of very peaceful. You feel you could just sit there forever. But the clarity is dimmed. The vividness is dimmed. It's like an internal sleeping. And people think that this is a sign of deep meditation, and in fact it's considered to be very, very dangerous. And in some traditional texts it said if you get into being attached to that kind of practice, then you get reborn as a cow. Because cows are very peaceful, chewing the cud, you know. I mean, you've seen them in the middle of the most busy roads in India, you know, the traffic roaring all around them. And they're sitting in the middle of the road, happily, like they're in a pasture, you know, instead of in the middle of Delhi, happily chewing away. And so this state of mind is regarded as very, very dangerous, because it looks like good, but it's not good. So it's very important to keep yourself very awake and alert. One Vipassana teacher named Jack Cornfield, he says that when he was practicing, he would sit on the edge of a very deep well, on the rim of the well, because you know you're not going to start falling asleep if you're sitting on the edge of the well. And Milarepa, the great yogi of Tibet, when he first started, he used to have a lit butter lamp on his head in order, again, to keep very wide awake, because if you start slightly dozing, you know. So it's very important to keep the mind relaxed, spacious, but very, very sharp. At the end of meditation, one should feel very calm and relaxed throughout one's whole being, but very clear, very alert, very aware. So when the mind has become like that, and one is able to watch the flow of thoughts, then one goes to the next stage, which is this insight, this inquiry, and starts looking at the mind and questioning it to death, basically. Everything which we know, which appears to us to come from the outside or arise from within us, everything which we perceive is thought. We are constantly thinking, receiving and analyzing and digesting and emoting, thinking. Everything we do, all our words and our actions are based on a previous intention, a thought. Our whole life is governed by thinking. What is a thought? Do we ever look? Do we ever ask? What is a thought? Where does it come from? Where does it go to? In this instant, where is it staying? What does it look like? What is it? It governs everything we do, and yet we don't even know what it is. And we believe it. We believe our thoughts. Whatever our thoughts are telling us, we think that's how things really must be, because that's what I'm thinking. I mean, thoughts are very important. They govern everything. People kill for their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideologies. What is a thought? And then, of course, who is thinking? And if we say, well, I am thinking, then, of course, the ultimate question, who am I? When the mind is moving and full of thoughts, when the mind is quiet and at rest, and the awareness which knows both, is that the same or is it different? Who is aware? What is this awareness? Can the awareness see itself? Can we be aware of awareness? We live in our minds, and we have to know what's going on in there. And Buddhist meditation is about that. It's not just about sitting, blissing out. It's about really examining the mind at all levels, deeper and deeper and deeper, through direct experience. Because that's the only way to be liberated from the tyranny of the mind. Meditation, like any other skill, can be learned. We You know, I mean, if you want to learn to play the piano, you know, we can all, if we practice hard enough with patience, we can accomplish. But I mean, it doesn't mean we're all going to end up being Rubinstein. But we can nonetheless get to a level of proficiency. And so everyone also likewise, if they give their attention to practice, can accomplish something. But it only comes through practice and practice and practice. And taking that practice into daily life as much as possible. Just being conscious during the day, what we're doing, what we're thinking. And asking again and again, who is thinking? Who is looking? Who is acting? Because then gradually, like an onion, you begin to peel off the layers and layers of false identification. We are not who we think we are. I think all religious traditions are joined in this. We are not who we imagine ourselves to be. But first we have to understand who we are not before the mind can open up into a whole different level of consciousness, which is our true nature. It's not that we have to acquire something we don't have. What we have is to uncover what at the moment is shrouded from us. For example, while we are watching the mind streaming past, then as our attention, as our awareness becomes more focused, more clear, then of itself the mind begins to quieten down, to run. It's like you know, if you take it as an example of a movie without pushing too far with this analogy, then you know, you see there is the screen and there is the movie being played, and it's moving so fast that it seems real. But if we begin to really watch it, then slowly it begins to slow down and slow down and slow down, and we recognize that it's just little transparent moments, little transparent frames, which are usually moving so fast that it looks like it's continual. But actually it's not continual. And as the mind begins to slow down, so we begin to, our awareness becomes stronger like a bright light. And then at some point, the whole stream of thoughts can just fall apart. And then in that gap between the last thought and the next thought, we recognize the true nature of the mind. The true nature of the mind is something which cannot be seen, cannot be grasped, but it can be known. And then what we need is to keep, you know, increasing those moments of insight, increasing them until gradually they become habitual. The one thing we all share is that we have consciousness and we have a mind, and if we don't do something with our mind in this lifetime, then this is the one time when we have the opportunity. You know, this is it. You are all here because you have an interest in a spiritual path, because you have an interest in something beyond the everyday round of your work and your family and your social activities. There's something more that you are looking for. You are all intelligent, you are all educated, you are all motivated. So please, in this lifetime, don't waste this. Find a practice which speaks to you, that is meaning for you, and keep at it. Don't give up. Because now is the time. This is all we have. If we waste this time, then next time, who knows? Will all the causes and conditions come together again? Unlikely. If we have wasted this opportunity now. The nature of the mind is infinite compared to the sky. And we get completely absorbed in all the clouds, and we don't see the sky. But the sky is there waiting to be seen, waiting to be recognized. If we only do that with our life, that already makes our life deeply meaningful if we come back to our true nature. So that's what, in Buddhist methods, this is what it's all about. It's coming back to recognizing who we are not in order to open ourselves to something so much greater than what we think we are. As a professor said this afternoon, you know, nirvana means extinction, but it doesn't just mean extinction. What does it mean extinction of? And it means extinction of all the negative qualities of the mind, but also of our ignorance. The Buddha hardly ever described nirvana, because he said, you know, nirvana by its very nature, and you know, our true nature is the unconditioned. And anything you say is conditioned, right? So that's why it's not described very much, because immediately we start to talk about ultimate reality, we bring it back down into relative reality. You can't talk about something which is beyond mind. But you can experience it. And then different people, different religions, different spiritual paths describe it using different words sometimes, and it sounds like a different thing, but of course it's the same thing, because it's our true nature. And nothing is more worthwhile in this lifetime than to strive to recognize this and to learn how to abide within this, and then to help others to also likewise access this level of our very profound state of awareness, which is who we really are. I mean, you couldn't listen to me, you couldn't see me, you couldn't think if we didn't have this basic fundamental awareness and consciousness. It's just that we're not conscious of being conscious, because we're so caught up with all the superficial thinking. We don't see the sky because of all the clouds. But the clouds couldn't exist if it wasn't for the sky. The clouds come from the sky, they go back into the sky. So anyway, the most important thing we can do in this lifetime is to learn to tame the mind, to train the mind, and to transcend the ordinary conditioned mind, so that we can wake up. Buddha means wake. We're all asleep, we're dreaming. And dreams seem very real until you wake up. Then you reckon, oh, that was just a dream. And then we fall back to sleep again. But our work in this lifetime is to wake up and to try to help others to also waken. Nothing else is as important as that. So let's hope that in this lifetime, that much at least we can accomplish, that we wake up. Are there any questions? One or two only.
Several years ago, I got trained in the Goenka version of Vipassana. And so for a year and a half, every day I meditated between 2 to 6 hours.
Wow.
And the reason I stopped was not because of my willpower, but I felt like I was getting more and more insular in myself. And it was very different than when I would do the silent meditation retreats, where we would all meditate for 14 hours a day, but we were all living together and eating and going to sleep at the same time. So I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between meditation and community, since you have this nunnery.
Well, I think, yes, I think that one needs to strike a balance. Because sometimes, even though, of course, meditation is for overcoming the ego, if one is not careful, it ends up, in a way, by focusing ourselves on ourselves. Therefore, in Buddhism, there is also a lot of emphasis on doing meditations like loving kindness and compassion and so forth. And also of bringing one's level of awareness and mindfulness out into the community. I mean, the Buddha, when he started, after he'd been sitting under trees for a few weeks, he went, of course, to Saranath and met with his erstwhile companions. And after teaching the Four Noble Truths, he started a sangha. He started a community. And at one time, Ananda said to him, I've been thinking about it, and I think that good companionship is half of the spiritual life. And the Buddha said, no, don't say that, Ananda. It's the whole of the spiritual life. And the Buddha put a lot of emphasis on good companionship and how to live harmoniously with others. So in the West, we tend to emphasize more meditation, but in Asia, apart from, people who go and stay in long retreats for many years to hone their skills, nonetheless, the emphasis is on how to live harmoniously with others and to be in relationship with others as part of the spiritual path. So I think that it's very important that that we have this balance between going inwards and then taking that and using it within our society. If we feel that meditation is making me, sometimes people say, we feel that something inside me has gotten cold and is like, or some nuns were telling me, some Western nuns, not Tibetan school, that they felt something inside them had dried up, like a plant which hadn't got enough water. And that's because of this overemphasis on Vipassana without any devotion, and meditations on compassion and loving kindness, which water the heart, which helps the Bodhi tree of the heart to grow big and strong and put down deep roots. Very important to balance this introspection with practices for opening up the heart through devotion and through compassion.
Yes, I think I have a danger of chewing my cud next lifetime. However, I can't really find any wells or any butter lamps to either fall down or have my head soaked in. I was wondering if you have any suggestions to help keep my meditation awake instead of falling asleep.
Well, I mean, traditionally, for example, they say sit up very, you know, make your posture very good. Not tense, but strong, you know, don't slump. Maybe meditate in a light room rather than a dark room. Outside, maybe, you know, where there is, especially where there is a lot of expanse of sky, if possible. Keep your eyes open. And keep your sessions short, not too long. And make the determination at the beginning that you are doing this practice for the sake of all beings. That the reason why we are practicing is because we have the opportunity to practice, whereas most beings do not. And therefore, it is incumbent on us to do our very best so that we will be, either in this life or in future lives, in a position to really be able to benefit others. So get your motivation strong, right? Because that reminds us that we are not doing this just for ourselves, and therefore if I don't feel like it, well, so what? We are doing this on behalf of all beings. This is our commitment, that we have to get our own mind in order that we can really now and for, you know, endlessly be there for others to help them. Just as we need teachers to help us, in the future, you know, with this stream of consciousness can also be of benefit for helping others. So that's our responsibility. That should keep you awake.
Thank you.
Anyway, I think that's enough for tonight. I'm sure you're all falling asleep. It's a very early morning, and now it's getting on for nearly 10 o'clock. So we will just stop here and dedicate the merit, please. Tanji Rupani, Tony Nepradranam, Panjini, Chikana, Jibala Tupai, Sepi Sole Droa, Droa, Ishu. So thank you very much. And the good thing about meditation is that really it's not nearly as difficult as it appears. And as one, like any skill, as one begins to learn about it, then of itself the practice naturally deepens. And the results are really, in this world there is nothing more important than becoming at least the masters of our own mind. And to put an end to our incessant slavery. That's worthwhile striving for. Nothing else in this world is as worthwhile as finding out ultimately who we really are and understanding who we really are not.